lost in the message of power. So let's first do what? It is, just for the lower, it's a stock bar and there's only one side. So you would think, like the question earlier, why don't you have small, medium, and large? Well, if this one stock bar fits, 70 to 80% of the population, the other jaws are smaller, some jaws are smaller, you really can't go smaller because then you got 5.0 implants, so maybe smaller, so you have a smaller percentage that's larger, but then, let's first start with this, kind of baby steps before you start getting other sizes. So right now there's one size that fits 70 to 80% of people. Patent pending. The biggest thing about it, if you look at the discs, they're hemispherical, so that's how they slide and compensate for the different deviations of the implant. And the discs, at first it looks like a lot, but the two discs around the bar, they're just simply called bar discs. They're the same thing, and there's only one other disc for the screw, it's called a screw disc. So it's not that crazy if the whole thing came apart.
Don't take it apart.
Don't take it apart. So these discs slipping in and out of each other, they allow for the deviation of the implant. They kind of change 4 degrees, from the angle. There's a height. That's 0.5, and then a horizontal 0.4 millimeters. So 0.5 doesn't sound like a lot, but in the mouth, we all know like a millimeter is pretty big stick. So it allows for any deviation. I'm going to go over the two kind of most critical heights. So let's do the 22 millimeter height. Why 22 millimeters? Give like an all-on-4 is 15, but that's from the tissue height. If you're measuring from the crest of the bone, that's 18. So we're really going 4 millimeters more than all-on-4. 22 millimeters. And if you're looking at the 22 millimeters, it's oddly not as hard to get as you would think, because usually there's so much resorption, and you're taking off this alveolar bone, getting down to the basal bone. It's really not as crazy as you think. So 22 millimeters. And oddly, I know that's being kind of thinking of a bad photographer. That was me being an extra photographer with my iPhone just over shoulder. But you get a lot from that 22 millimeter pin. And the biggest thing, like Mike was saying, you have to be behind tooth 8 and 9, because that's the long axis of your implant, and that's going to be your screw access hole. So the screw access hole of the trefoil is not coming out the incisal, tooth on the trefoil. So this is a dicom. I just grabbed it. It really didn't end up a trefoil. It's just a dicom I grabbed. But you can kind of tell a lot from it. That's stuff, there's still, probably drop it down some more. But I'm really just looking, is the implant sticking outside of the jawbone? I was talking to David, this morning. David was talking using a software for orthodontic surgery. It just feels better knowing you're going to have some success, at time of surgery, or it fits. So, it's not bad. The bar height. So if you go through the history of our wraparound bars, we had a wraparound bar that was 3 millimeters. Then we changed it to a hybrid bar, went to 4 millimeters. This trefoil bar is 5.5. So why, the height of the bar, one thing about acrylic won't break if you don't flex it. And if you ever walk through Home Depot with a 2x4, you kind of know which way to hold it, so it doesn't bounce up and down. So the taller, to decrease the flexion, you increase the height. So 3.0 is good, that's proven. 4 millimeters is great with our hybrid, but we have a pretty long cantilever on this trefoil, and that's why it's 5.5. So it doesn't flex, so you don't break your acrylic. And the 22 millimeters. And so you have enough acrylic wrapped around it. Because acrylic gets its strength by bulk. If you have thin acrylic, you don't have strong acrylic. implant, you're right, and the other people I've seen and talked to, the other surgeons in my area, you know, nobody has ever used a 6mm tissue collar height. It's always about 4.5. And going to California and talking to other people, like 98% of the people are using 4.5, you know, collar height. So I don't know, I don't even know why they have a 6mm. There must be, because some people are gonna have a huge amount of tissue at some point and they have it as a default. They just have it as an option. And it's a conical connection. So let's say it fails, and you can't do the trapdoor, but you still have 1 or 2 implants in the bone. Like if it was like it's a bailout situation where that one person, like, they come back in 3 months, it's still a very typical conical connection RP platform that is nothing special. It's like all our other implants. So you could then go back and put a Nobel Active, Nobel Parallel, you know, anything with a conical connection, still make a traditional custom titanium bar for it, like a typical all-on-4. The surgical protocol, I'm going to do it kind of quick because this is Mike and Mike's, you know, thing. But I'm just going to say this, the bigger story, where we are in the story. So it's 4 templates. You know, you start out with the gag template. So there's 4 pre-made surgical templates that you go through.
Question.
Yeah.
Why are you referring to 5mm diameter as RP?
Oh, you know, that's confusing, but, and the reason it's confusing, the reason you're asking that question, is because when we had the trial of Nobel replace, that 5.0 was a wide platform. And then we went to the Nobel Active. Our 5.0 Nobel Active has a back taper. And they couldn't squeeze in a wide platform connection because the conical connection is sucking up a lot of real estate. So the 5.0 Nobel Active is oddly a regular platform. So when you're going to the conical connection implants, the 4.3 implant and the 5.0 implant have a regular platform because it's different from the trial that's sucking up a lot of space for that cone to come. So it's confusing. So a lot of times people, they always say, I have a 5.0, they just assume it was a wide platform because the trials were always like that. So that's a good question. Any other questions?
Yeah. I like the fact that 5.5 acting has that wider attachment, right? And I'm still kind of irritated they don't make the 6 replace, right, anymore with a wide conical connection.
Yeah,
I don't understand why they don't do that.
So let's say the 5.5, let's say the Nobel Active implants, the 5.0 couldn't fit in a wide platform, so they did a 5.0 Nobel Active regular platform. So everybody wanted the wide platform. So with Nobel Active, the only way to do that was to make it just a little bit bigger and do a 5.5. And so you could stick in a wide platform up there. But the Nobel Replace, they haven't done that yet to do a 5.5 Nobel Replace yet.
Yeah, they've done it with the 4, 3, and the 5. Why didn't they make the 6 with a wide attachment? I don't get that. It's been irritating me because I used to like that 605. That 605 replace implant was a good implant.
It's on the wish list for sure.
Especially in median implant sites, in median molar sites. So I've argued with them for years, why don't you put a wide attachment in the 6.0 replace, okay? And now these guys are here, back here too, that are all the Nobel guys, have had that complaint for a long time. You already got the wider attachment in the 5.5, why can't you put that attachment in the 6.0 replace? I don't get it. So anyway, I'm
totally with you. This is definitely on the wish list. I don't know. I would think it's something.
Yeah, it's been on the wish list for 4 years though, 5. You know, anyway. Okay.
So just real quick, as you're going through this, the guide template, and all of the surgeries that I've been to, the surgeons do not know the name of the templates. They just call them 1, 2, 3, 4. Give me the next one. So knowing the names, I'm just going to say one. So the first one, you're just kind of punching through with your little round bird, just to identify the outside, where you're going to drill your 2mm guide. And it's kind of like a plane flying in. This trefoil has, you know, kind of like its wings, and you kind of think of it like an airplane, where you kind of have to control the pitch, the roll, and the yaw. So this first template, it seems very very simple, but you're getting a lot of information from this plane landing on your, plastic. Make sure it's level out, and then once you have your measurements and it's level, poke your, punch your little brown bar through there to identify your, for the next template.
Another thing it shows is the width.
Ooh.
It shows you the width. That, it's what we used to do in the Novum all the time, that would help give us the width, if we have enough width in the mantle. They kind of know that information ahead of time with the pre-planning now with Cody, but that template also is 6 millimeters.
Wow.
So it tells you, 7 millimeters, I think it is, tells you the width if it's wide enough.
That's really good. So the width of that is 7 millimeters.
I think it is.
This one you're just doing that, the third one you're placing your center implant, and the fourth one, the B template, is your back two. You just call it 1, 2, 3, 4. And by the time you're done with that, you've got that. If you really had to remember it, it's got B. You really had to go crazy with the acronyms. I'm glad I'm the last guy. Let's just say that. So, why are we doing it? Sounds a little salesy, but treat more patients better. And it's not treat more patients, it's treat more patients better. So if the default is back to a locator overdenture, you're just now trying to give them an option to go fixed screw replacement. Trifold, yep, it's in the middle, so let's say prices real quick. So sure, an overdenture, let's say an average, let's say 7,000 to 8,000. By the time you're over here, let's just say, unless you're doing, in sequence all that, let's say about 27,000. So this could be somewhere, let's just say 17,000 plus or minus a couple thousand. So somewhere, this it's almost like a $10,000 jump from one to the other. So there was never a product in the middle. You either had to do a lower, cost two-locator overdenture or kind of an expensive. So if you're going into your surgeon's office, and you guys as surgeons here can do your own, study, like how, for the people who turn down the all-on-4, it might be about 4 out of 10, they're turning it down because of price. So you're not really offering them, you're not really downgrading, like what Dr. Arthur was saying, like, you're really trying to treat them better by saying, all right, we can do this, like, let's look in, let's not guarantee it, because you still gotta get it into the software, you still gotta do your measurements, you can't just say, there might be an option for you, where we can upgrade you to the prep one, but we're not sure yet. So it's kind of an upgrade, not really a downgrade. 10 teeth in a day, straightforward, and, like whatever. Let's go over, let's get to the, let's do the how. So real quick, is there any thoughts or questions? Sometimes I just start rambling on. So there's 2 ways to do it. I'm going to do the first way kind of quick because it's right out of instructions for use, and it's a good way to default back to. Then the second way, we're going to take a little bit more time because it's a little bit more of a shell game, a little bit more confusing, but if we get the basic simple way first, we'll do the second way, a little quicker. So the first way, this is the picture. This is me taking the picture. This is my guy right here. I already told this. This is my Dr. Arthur. So first, pre-surgery. So if you have a GP that says, I have a trifold case, I want to do it, you can't just say, let's do it Friday. Like even the lab person, like Stefano, you have to be like, oh, wait a minute. First we need models. We need a mount on an articulator. I got some instructions for you. So let's mount the maxillary upper denture first. And I'll get a little more detail on that later. But real quick, just to show you these pictures, I'm getting this right out of instructions for use as well. So all the details are in there if you want to go to instructions for use. So I'm taking it right out there. Here's the disc, kind of went over this. And we're going to start off with these verification dates. But let's go back to what you first need, and I must have it in the next slide. You're going to need a mounted maxillary model. It's just going to save you a lot of time later. So the very first step of surgery is what Mike showed in that video. You need your verification kit. So the lab part can kind of hang out in the back, and when the 3 implants are done, they don't have to suture yet. You can kind of, as soon as they're done with the placing implants, the lab guy or whoever, the dentist, can show up and he can screw on this, transfer abutments. The center temporary abutment is nothing special, it's just a non-engaging temporary abutment. And next thing you know, you have your verification jig at step 1, and it happens relatively quickly for the lab guy who the GP is doing it. It's about 10 minutes. You know, the first step is done for the lab. And here's a quick video of the mic. But that's kind of a quick video of them just using some triad gel, sticking those transfer abutments together. And that's the picture afterwards. You just unscrew it and the first step is done. Next thing you know, and when you stick your transfer abutments on there to the temporary abutment, you want a little bit of space. The only reason if you are touching it while you are screwing it, you might introduce a little bit of stress or strain on that temporary abutment. It's going to bounce back when you unscrew it. So you need a little bit of space. I've seen them where these little swing arms were, one was in the back, one was in the front, one was, it doesn't matter, left, top, but it seems like it's a little easier if both the swing arms are in the front for when you're swooshing around your triad. You stick it in your putty, the next thing you know, you have a master model. We'll get to how to do the intaglio a little later, but that's not why that video is important. So setting the fixation mechanism. So the next step, once you have your master model, is taking your truck wheel bar, passively sitting it on your model analog, and you are going to screw it down. And these are the tie-in screws. So you have to passively hold it because these tie-in screws oddly do not engage into the model analogs. So once you tighten those tie-in screws, you are locking your discs because it's screwing into the little round abutment below it, and that's kind of sandwiching and locking those discs together so those discs no longer slip. And you are passively holding it on with your finger, so after you tighten all of them, you can pick up that truck wheel bar off the stone model. Another reason for that is just, there are a couple different techniques, but one thought is, you are once again not building in any stresses and strains into the discs or the bar when you're tightening it. You know it's totally passive. You tighten all 3, you can lift that up and down, and you know off of those model analogs, and you know it's completely passive. Perfect. Now all you have to do is set the discs because they're tight from the screw, but now you have to like put some we use this one just happened to be fiber force. So some kind of acrylic, composite, whatever you want to use. This one just happened to be fiber force. It's a PMA. And we notice when you're putting it around the bar, if you don't sandblast it, that acrylic or composite, it seems to chip off pretty easy. So if you put a little bit of wax on the top of the screw head to protect it, you sandblast it, this will stick a whole lot better. So now your discs are set. You no longer need that little tri-in screw anymore. That little tri-in screw that kind of set through, that was holding the discs, the acrylic is now holding the discs. So take out your tri-in screw. Or you can weld it. So what, Dr. Eckhart was saying, earlier today really, he was saying like, do you use do you use this, fiber force or acrylic or some kind of triad to lock those discs? or do you weld it? I guess it's, you know, I have about 50-50, and it depends what side of the fence you are, but the thought is like, maybe if that ever came back and you needed to change those discs for whatever reason, you can't change them if they're welded. But it seems like a pretty secure thing, so there's like good and bad, good and bad. So it's kind of nice. I think Mike would, you know, recommend it.
We've all
He preferred
done
it.
it with acrylic. It's worked fine. That's, a lot of that is because the lab, that's what they really wanted to do. They didn't want to spot weld it. But one of the advantages in having it as the acrylic is if you did lose one implant, you could take the bar off, take out that one failed implant, and I had to do this with Nobel a few times. Put the bar back on with the two implants, tell the patient not to chew anything hard, and then, you know, like 3 months later, go back and put another implant using the jigs in the same spot. And then if you can, then you just remove that acrylic and tie it into that implant again, and you can redo the whole thing without having to remake everything. You can tie in that extra implant again. If you have it spot welded, I don't think you'll be able to get a bar again. You're gonna have to go to a whole new bar. So that's one of the advantages of using acrylic.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure there's any disadvantages, because it's all tied together, it doesn't move anyway, and it seems to be doing fine.
And as much as you keep it
Once you
around.
tighten that screw down, it's tight again by the screw and the acrylic.
Yeah, and wrapping it with acrylic, it even gets like crazy strong.
Yeah.
Definitely. So it might not be as strong as you wrap it with acrylic.
So we had a question, and that is, when you're trying to do that with the temporary screw with your initial tightening, why don't you put that in your mouth and avoid any distortion in your plastic?
I guess, to some degree you could, but there's gonna be, also, back and forth like a verification jig. You are gonna put it in the mouth for a bite and a wax trying. So it's gonna be a little bit like a verification jig, and this so you still know your working model is accurate. But I guess to some degree, you know, I thought of that too, I guess to some degree you could, but at the same time, they're getting, we're taking this back to the lab at this point, but you guys are set up a little differently, the prosthodonts and the lab right there. And I'll get to that, you know, on step 2, but at some point, the way we're doing it, you do the verification jig, you get your bite, and you go to the lab, and you let the patient go home. But maybe at some point, if the patient is still there, you pour up the still model, you do, you know, verification, you pour up the still model, maybe you could do it, but I just think it might be easier for someone to, and sometimes it almost easier for 2 people, somebody's really passively holding it, somebody's doing really tight up to 15 centimeters, but you really just tighten it down. So I think you could, but I just don't know anybody who's done that. It makes sense, but, because then you know you're on it. So this way, once you have the bar and everything fixed, you put your bite rim on the bar, and you are either going to do a wax. We're back to good old fashioned dentures. We're just gonna do a bite, a wax try-in, and an insert. So the hardest part about this whole thing was the 10-minute verification jig, that goes pretty quick, and then you just have to set the discs. Once you set the discs, you're good, you're back to good old fashioned. You put a rim on there, a bite rim, you do your bite, you mount the models, and you're ready for a wax try-in. So this starts to go really, really fast once you're past setting the discs. That seems to be the most technical step of this whole thing. The process just like a marketing thing. You process it, and you're done. Just quick review here. Verification jig and set the discs. That seems to be the hardest thing. Put the bite rim on it, do the bite. Hopefully you can do this, one day, let the patient go home. Maybe bring them back the next day when they're maybe not as groggy or tired, maybe their muscles need to relax a little bit. Do the double check with the wax try-in. I would not skip the wax try-in, which some people thought that would be a good idea, but almost everyone, the wax try-in needed adjusted a little bit, like they were just open on one side. If you skip the wax try-in and get a little bit of opening on one side and not the other, you're almost like grinding it all up at that point. It seems like a wax try-in is just an extremely good idea, and not to skip it. So, delivery.
What do you do with the calculus?
You can do that in a couple different spots. Like in this workflow, you could do it, while you're doing the bike, doing a bike, you could just switch the polygonal clock thing underneath there and get the intaglio at the same time. And then when you have it on this master model, you kind of see your impression material, and underneath it, you kind of retro fill it with the ginger tech. So you kind of have a ginger tech intaglio. If you were to go by instructions for use, you actually don't have to do that. What the instructions for use is saying, don't worry about the intaglio, because this is kind of a cookie cutter measured thing. What do you think? They're going to say, well, you have your bar, wax 2 millimeters of thickness of wax underneath there, because the bone was flattened, and you're going to have about 3 millimeters of tissue. So you could eyeball 2 millimeters of wax, and you're going to wrap it with acrylic. And since that's a little bit of a guesstimate, and the lower arch seems to be, you can punish the lower a little bit easier than the upper, because you can have the space. With the upper, you get that, that whistle. But the lower, you can have a little bit of space. So if the lab doesn't retrofill that to get the ridge height, they could just wrap 2 millimeters evenly underneath there, and it seems to work because it kind of, how high the bar away is from the bone, because it's all stock parts. But right here, you could, do, polygonal clock hang like integral impression. You could do it at your wax try-in. You could, take then retrofill it later, and then you have a little bit better, idea of where that is. And then pulls up that. So the timing, like how would you do this? Like maybe these first 2 steps could be done in the first day. Maybe send the patient home, do this the second day, wax try-in, give them a little break, and then your final, let's say, so Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then Thursday could be your 24-hour post-op check, or whatever days you want to do that. So let's say, like Jerry, really talking like, could you do this all in one day? Yes. You probably could, start early in the morning. You just gotta make sure you get the bite, get your wax try-in, as soon as possible, lunchtime, 1 o'clock, process it, get it in on the evening. So is it possible? Yes. But sometimes it's a strain on the lab. This is the first case with the Mike Eckhart, and I showed this just because it's not a perfect one. So if you're looking at this, and this is a panoramic, so it doesn't totally show the exact measurements. But you can see that we could have taken a little bit more bone down here, and it's not because it's not pushed into the tissue. It's just a panoramic, and it's blurry, and it's wavy. It's not exactly dimensionally correct. But we could have taken a little bit more bone down on this side, and it's sort of like an airplane. It's just off a little bit, on the pitch. It still works, but it's just off a little bit on the pitch, but it, starts making you think like, oh, template, number 1, let's just tweak it just a little bit. That's my backyard. So real quick, any thoughts on that? In the first way, I have to remind myself to involve with the audience.
One question, is there any secondary verification of the orientation of all the various parts of the pieces?
The best way to do it is the try-in bar. So that try-in bar, I think, we had a picture of that with Mike at the bottom. But that try-in bar, after the implants are placed, you can put that try-in bar in, and that gives you a real, and every single surgery I've been, kind of floating around. I haven't been to all of Mike's, I've only been to a couple of Mike's, but, I have like Delaware, Maryland, so every single one, that try-in bar, that distal extension, the surgeons are usually right-handed or left-handed, it seems like they remove more on one side of the arch than the other. So it looks perfectly fine from, this viewpoint. And I remember you doing your first one, you were asking, what do you see from over there? What do you see from over there? But it was still kind of, you know, more was reduced on one side, you put that triumph bar on, it's like, oh my gosh, you know, we need like 2 more millimeters, boom, you know, taken on this one side. So every single surgeon seemed like that triumph bar was a key point in knowing how much bone for the distal extension. So one side's perfect, one side needs a little bit more, they mark it with a burr, and then they just reduce it down to there, and it was fine. But that's probably best in the second way, because after that, you're kind of moving forward, you're kind of stuck with what you got. So now the triumph, now your traploid bar, after you fix those discs, you're putting it on, and at that point, you're hoping all is good. All is good. So this second way gets a little bit more of a shell game here, but we kind of know the workflow. You have to show up with, you know, if they say, I'm ready to do one, let's do it Friday, the lab person here would say, hey, first we need an upper lower mount, we need a site registration, we're gonna mount it on an articulator, and we're gonna have this articulator, and we are going to, just like you're doing an immediate denture, you're gonna, you know, grind the teeth off the stone, you're gonna do a wax setup. You're gonna make a bite index from that wax setup. This bite index is gonna be used twice. You're gonna use it at the time of the surgery to kind of hold that clear. So this clear dupe is this wax triangle. We don't want to process it, we want to keep it in wax because we're gonna use these teeth, we're gonna take them off the wax. We're gonna reuse them, so we're gonna do it in a clear dupe for the surgery. And you're gonna do it a second time, so when we do jump these teeth onto the bar, we're gonna have, you know, this bite index. So that bite index is used a lot. And you're kind of looking at this, like this structural bar, this one was relevant. This is kind of individual. So, time of surgery, these are the 3 things you need. If I was a surgeon, the lab, the prosthodontist, the dentist, I would say, what do you need? I need a mounted maxillary upper, you know, the clear dupe and the bite index. That's what you need. Alright, getting started, marking the VDO. Mark the VDO. This one was Dr. Ecker. Take the bone. There it is, a hunk of bone. Where was that right? So once the implants are placed, you don't have to suture yet because I'm gonna do the verification jig. Well, you know, a lot of times Mike Finch is doing it, you know, and for the general dentist, you know, he's going in and doing verification jig. And then when you're done with that, you know, they can go back and start pouring tomorrow, and then the surgeon can start suturing. Triad is what we just happen to use. Switch it around. That's the marketing one, and that's ours. It's pretty straightforward. So now we're getting ready for the bite. We're going back to the clear dupe denture, and we put it in, you gotta mark the vertical, VDO. But keep in mind, at the same time, the only reason this is a little tricky, the healing abutments are on there. If you're looking at your healing abutment, in this, you know, in that folder, they're bridge healing abutments. So when you have to order more, you know, this oddly is a really good form. You will get your healing abutments in here, because they're 5 by 7 millimeters high, and it's a bridge healing abutment. Now these special, but you will order 3 more, because we need 3 more eventually. Because what we're gonna do is, we got this clear dupe, and we're gonna take an impression of these kind of tall healing abutments, like they're a closed tray impression code. Sounds a little weird, but we are gonna take an impression on these healing abutments.
You wanna make sure your lab makes space underneath that clear dupe for the healing abutments.
Yes. Yes. You know, even though we didn't have a bite index, this was another one. You know, you can still do a last minute bite registration just to make sure your clear denture is holding where it should hold. and you now have an impression of your helium bubble. Got your VDO. Now, everything you need is your verification jig and your impression of your helium bubble. So the VDO, we're gonna put with that, and the verification jig, we're gonna set the discs. You know, that one has to be welded. With this, with the bite and the impression, we're going to mount the master model that we poured, you know, we're gonna mount this. So the only way to get, because we have impressions on here, but remember, this did not have helium abutments on it. So the only different thing about this second workflow, you have to buy 3 extra helium abutments. Because we gotta get these 3 extra helium abutments, don't come in the kit. You have to buy an extra, because we're kind of outside instructions for use, we're kind of doing the second way. So if you put the helium abutments on these 3 analogs, this will now sit on those 3 impression or helium abutments.
But the lab can use those over and over.
Yes. Yep. The ones that's sitting on there, you mount the model, and this is another point if you wanted to, you could put, you know, squeeze in ginger tap underneath there to get your ridge height if you wanted to do that. Alright, remember this crazy thing. So, it's still in wax. We need this bite index again to go over here. And we're gonna take those teeth and we're gonna put them in the bite index. So the bite index looks a little beefy, but that's just because it's also going down 3/4, you know, a little bit more than the height of contour on the denture teeth. So the denture teeth hold up in there, so you're able to jump the teeth onto the wire. It's just a quicker setup for the last guy. Polished and now literally is down the process of finishing, and you're kind of done. I'm gonna do a quick review.
In all these cases, anteriorly of less space, you've done a lot of reproduction. What really you're not doing reproduction, and it looks almost like the bar is gonna come up on some cases, and the teeth are gonna be very thin and possibly break.
No, that's, when you're doing the very first rheoplasty of 22 millimeters in the front, that has to go the whole way back, 22 millimeters, parallel to the occlusal plane. So you have to have your 22 millimeters go the whole way
A
back.
lot of cases look like you have to finish.
Yeah, yeah. So some people who are already really, you know, resorbed, it's a lot easier. You know, in the back, they're missing the most of your teeth for a while. But, yeah, you have to, if not, if you don't take enough bone off, that first truckload thing is gonna come in, you know, at the wrong, you know, wrong, will be pitched.
But since you don't need the tendency anyhow, so the only thing that's screwed closer to the teeth. And so you have a combination of the two, so visually, if they're not open, it looks like you have a combination. Aesthetically, later on, then.
And that's where this system, you can't be as precise as you can with like an all-on-4 or some kind of you know, crown and bridge technique. And that's one of the compromises we talked about with the patient who may end up with a thicker prosthesis, like we talked about earlier. Because I don't think you can really get it all the time right where you want to get it thin without getting it way off the back and having something that's gonna be an issue with height and space between the upper dentition and the bar. So there's times when you're gonna have a compromise and have a thicker anterior restoration. That's just the way it is. So.
Real quick, just to review, you know, verification jig, power repetition is another whole feature. Verification jig, set your discs, and you do your bite with this clear tube. Or, we still got this way, so you're still getting your bite, either with the bite room, you know, on the temporal bar itself. And the one time we had to, and the only reason I think I'm going over this first way, you know, no one seems to do it. There was definitely a time when we was at a surgery, it was one south of here. We could not fit this clear dupe into the person's mouth. For whatever reason, they were freaking, you know, they were just like clenched tight almost. So we went back, we set the discs, we put the bite rim on it, we just snuck it in the mouth. It was like a little cookie flies in a little spot there. We didn't screw it down, it just sort of like plopped on the 3 implants, just passively, it was kinda nice, just passively, she bit down, she was almost biting down anyways, Clint, pulled it out, we slipped it out, and we had the bite. So that was a tough one, so it was just glad we kinda had this, I guess knowledge as a backup, you know, the way to do it from instructions for use. So if this doesn't work and you have to default back to this, it's just good to know about it. You could easily do the bite with the bar itself. Or the last try it, you know, or, you know, it's the next step. And then deliver it. So once you get kind of past this bite thing, it's very straightforward. So for a lab, it seems like this verification jig and setting the discs is, there's gonna be this huge learning curve. It's a very short learning curve. Every lab that, you know, because they go to these courses and they forget, and then they get their first one, then they go on and do PowerPoint. After they get through their first one, they're kind of like, oh, I get it. And it seems like it becomes very easy, very quick. But the first one, it's like, I think we're so used to being comfortable what we routinely do every day. But as soon as you get past this first one, it seems like it's, the comfort level, you know, happens quickly.
Question. Once you have that verification jig, that's all you need to send to the lab at the time of surgery. Everything else is done in the lab. You have your by registration, you have, so all you need is that verification jig to mount the bar.
Yeah. So a lot of times, like last one, I think I was at the lab. You know, Mike Binkley and Mike, you know, they were doing the surgery. I was just hanging out there, you know, doing other stuff because, you know, I'm the lab guy and I'm always doing trap work. And then Mike Binkley came in that afternoon, you know, with the verification jig and with this. You know, handed it off to the lab who now has done several of these. And it just seemed like, all right, for the model, let me set the discs, let me mount it, you know, wax trying, and it was like ready for the next day. You know, so it seems like, so this way I kind of like it. You're not spending a lot of time at the surgeon's office and the patient can go home. And then the next day you can do your wax trying.
So the next thing you have, the wax trying in, that can go back to the lab, be processed, and then you're delivered 48 hours.
Yeah.
That's if you get a lab that's supposed to do all that. Okay? So, when I first took the course in San Diego, they only offered that lower option. And Mike and I and the lab guy came with us, and we took, 3 of us went out and took the original course, and we said, how can we get this from the day of surgery, that you can get all the information that you need, okay, to go to a wax try-in stage. And that's where we came up with, well, we have a clear dupe and take an impression of the impression coatings. We hoped that that would be enough, and it was. In the cases we've done, it's really worked out well. So there's been some minor movement in the wax try-in, but it hasn't been huge to anybody. And then you do the processing, and again, there's some moderate, you know, some mild occlusal adjustment, but it's really going smoothly. So that's working for us. I mean, but is it a mistake to do the bottom way? No, especially if you get a lab like an in-house lab. And, I mean, I think there's potential that is more accurate down there, okay? But for us, I don't have an in-house lab, and so we've been doing it that way. And like I said, it's been more like teeth in a week for us. You get all the information, the time of surgery, that goes to the lab, it's like usually 2 or 3 days later. The lab's not turning it over overnight, because they got a lot of other stuff they're doing too, you know. So you gotta have a lab that's willing to really buy in and do this like in 2 days, you know, and really, they jump right on it when it shows up, and you gotta get it to them as soon as you can, that kind of stuff, you know. So anyway, for us, it's been more like teeth in a week. But I think you could do it in 2 days. I think you could easily, you know, if the lab really wants to buy in and do it. So I don't know how well you know your lab guys are willing to like kill themselves like that, you know.
We've had some cases like on 4 on 5. Impression right, it's just time of surgery, right? And that way, what comes back for the dentist is it drops it in, there's hardly any adjustment.
Yeah. And I've done that too.
They'll make our temporary straw and force be delivered the second day.
Yeah.
We don't try to do the conversion.
Yeah, that's much
too hard
easier.
of a
I don't
patient.
disagree with that, you know. In sequence is nicer for that, but anyway, so that's what we're doing and why. It ends up being teeth in a week for us. But yeah, I mean, you have an in-house lab, you can do it a day or 2 days. Or you have a lab that's really willing to buy in. Our lab, I'm happy with the lab. You guys, they really pay attention to make it happen within those couple of days. And I have had a case that I really wanted to do it right away. And they turned it over overnight, they did. anyway.
And this is just sort of an extra thing, you can do this or you can not do this, this is extra. You know, you can make these healing aids, this is, you know, Mike Binkley's handiwork. You know, I've seen him go back, so I'm just the one taking the pictures. But once you have your master model and you have this, your analogs in there, you know, you just take some wax, just to outline a nice little U shape. You fill it up with Gindatech, and you oddly pull it out. You have a little healing aid for the person. Now this oddly is so similar to all your future cases that if you wanted to, you could use this same pattern and just make maybe 5 of them, or 10 of them, you know, then you just have them pre-made. But that is your healing aid, and then it just sits on top of those kind of tall healing abutments while the patient goes home.
I like that because it helps hold the tissues down. So you see them 2 days later from me, and I think if you didn't do that, the tissue would swell up, and you might have some difficulty getting things off and seeing things. So I think it's kind of a tissue conformer to hold things down and get to heal. I'm not sure it's really much, if any, more comfortable, or maybe actually be not as comfortable for the patient, but I tell them it's more comfortable for them. But I think it helps hold down those tissues. So then when we get when they're trying in the wax try-in, it's easy for the dentist to get in there and not have to worry about tissue being in the way. So I like it for that reason. We're making them ahead of time. The lab makes them, so we just have them just fit over top. You're always close enough that the rubber will fit.
Does that make it easier to do wax trying at 48 hours? Even if you had a lab for 24 hours?
That's what I'm
It's nice to have that tissue
Yeah, it's nice to have that tissue held down.
seal a little bit.
Yeah. So I think that just makes it easier when you get to try and helps get those tissues to kind of be conforming underneath.
I only have one more thing, I'm gonna go over the screws, but before we do the screws, any other quick thoughts or questions? Real quick, all right, the last thing, the screws, there's the try-in screws. Now just kind of remember, these try-in screws, it's almost a bad name, because it's not really for the try-in. But the try-in screws lock those discs together and they do not engage into the model analog. They're just for tightening those discs together. And if you want to,
Sitting in the conical is the only thing that's kind of holding it steady.
yeah, you're just literally passively holding it down. You know, when this was the try-in screw, the clinical screws are in, but if you're passively holding that, you tighten all 3, and then you can take it off with your, you know, you can take it on and off and know and confirm that it's passive. And then you lock the discs, and then you can take out those screws. If you take out the screw before you put all the, you know, acrylic around there, and then all the discs would also come out. So it kind of comes pre-assembled with the try-in screw and the discs. And there's a try-in bar, when you get to the hands-on, you'll see it, you'll have the actual bar, and the try-in discs will be in there. Or the try-in screws, so if you take that out, all the discs will fall out.
So like the doctor and the gentleman here said before, why wouldn't you want to drill it in the mouth?
You know what, it just seems like it's not it seems like that would be a go-to thing, but in reality, it seems like the patient is not there. It seems like you're doing the verification gig, you go back, they're sewing them up, you kind of, you know, put the healing button on there, they're kind of half crazy, you know, coming out of sedation, you're already back at the lab, and you're holding it down with your fingers because you have the master model. So it seems like you're doing it in the lab, you know, with your master model. It's just not part of the protocol, I guess, but I can see how you can go outside the protocol, maybe do it in the jaw. But it just seems like if you do it on the stone model, then you can verify the mouth, and then you go to the mouth.
I mean, you could be in the office, you know, take your verification rig, pour it up the speed stone. I mean, it makes minutes in your heart. You set it, and then you're going back. I mean, the patient's still there.
And the only other thing I'm thinking, I'm not trying to fight on this, the only other thing I'm thinking is, the model has to match the mouth anyway. It has to match it anyway. So it's just maybe more work in the patient's mouth, which you could be doing on a stone model anyway, because it has to be the same.
Okay.
But I see what you're saying, like, it seems like, well, they're doing the mouth, it's gonna be extra accurate, but it has to match it anyways. So maybe it's just less work in the mouth.
My thought process is if you're tracking it in the mouth, then you're putting in another, 10 seconds, your lab tech's putting a bite ring on it, and you get it right then and there.
Yeah, and then a quarter of a mile later, and that might work out, so yeah, go for it. I mean, like, it's sort of like everyone has a favorite meatloaf recipe.
I got you.
And the other thing that they talk about is these workflows, when people are trying to change them around, they recommend maybe doing the first 10 first without changing any workflow whatsoever. Then after your 10th one, if you want to try, maybe try, another way to do this, because all the labs, everyone's like an inventor, and they're trying to redo it. But even like Eckhart, he's done like 145 Nobel implants. I think and then 17 couplets. Like he's still doing it very cookie cutter following protocol. There's probably other ways to do this, but I'd probably stay with the protocol first. And I think it's easier on the model. And I can see where someone's like, I'm gonna do it in the mouth. But that's outside the protocol.
If I was gonna do that, I'd still set it on the model first.
Yeah, that's what I'm
And
just
then
saying,
try
you
it
pour
in.
it up
That's-
in speed
and I
stone,
don't
you
think
set
that's
it,
a
and then
mistake.
you do it in the mouth.
It's gonna give you another verification, we haven't done it, and we haven't had a problem with it, okay, and it's been a good fit, but frankly, all that's gonna do is confirm everything. So we haven't done it because it takes more time, and we've already got people waking up, we're trying to, but you're gonna have to take the healing abundance off then and do it, and put it back on again in a fresh surgical site, which could be a little bit of a hassle, especially if someone's waking up and not as numb anymore, So that's one of the things that might be an issue, but I can tell you that most of the time, you're probably gonna do what you're talking about and be able to do it. So if you wanted to do it, I don't think there's any reason not to. If you want to, go ahead, okay? But, I haven't done it yet. I'm thinking about it. Maybe I'm gonna do it in case and see what it's like, But I mean, it hasn't been necessary up to this point, so, but yeah, I don't think it's a mistake to do it.
So once you take out, and you're kind of done with it, once the discs are fixed, you're done with the trying screws, you'll never need them again. Unless, you have to reset a disc. Then you switch over to the lap screws. The lap screws are sticking out of there for the wax your bite rim, your wax trying, processing, and then the clinical screws, the only other set of screws that you'll have for the wax trying and for the insert are the clinical screws. So the GPs, the surgeons, and top down, and these, the lab, and those are the only 3 sets of screws there are.
You don't get choices, you get one.
You
could. You could actually use wider ones they have, If they're 7s, get the 7s.
Any other, anything else here?
What was his question? I'm sorry, what was his question again?
The question was, the clinical screws, are they used for the wax try-in and the insert? And the answer is yes.
Thank you.
Yes, you do, the clinical screws, it's a little bit of because you're always trying to keep the clinical screws very pristine and clean. You have to be careful how many times you're screwing them in and out, because you don't want to wipe off or hook up the black coating on there. The black coating is the dry lubricant. So, yeah, so there isn't like another, I mean, if someone wanted to buy another set of clinical screws just to have super clean, pristine ones for final insert, that would be the way to do it. But there aren't like lab screws for like an insert or trying. It's a good question. Any other? Well, I hope you guys have a good lunch. Patty, is there anything else? Or is it just lunchtime or?
Pipe down.
Thank you.